it's a very important, right? And a very important thing is that the idea that I have a relationship with my legal counsel that is secure and private and secure. And regardless of whether you're doing law in a place where law is laughed at and we have these like quote unquote kangaroo courts or whatever, or you're practicing law in a place where, law is an institution that, that we hold up and say like, this is what can protect things and help us fight against the status quo that's not good. Technology plays a part in you being able to do that. And without you actively knowing something about the technology you're using, you're letting down your clients, the organizations, and the reason why you get out of bed and the reason why you're doing this great work and not making, millions of dollars, working against progressive and positive things on this planet. Thanks for the work you do, by the way, lawyers.
To add on to Matt's point, before I joined Electronic Frontier Foundation, the organization that I work with, co-founded Black Movement Law Project, we help local communities build legal support infrastructure to protect themselves in moments of crisis. And one of the most frustrating things in that work was how many times I would have conversations with attorneys around the potential threats that their communications were open to, and the response would be, well, that's privileged information, it can't be used, right? So really drawing that idea, like legal protections and real protections are not the same, right? And as Matt alluded to, if I'm a malicious, I'm someone who has a political ideology that's different than your client or some. If knowing what I know, one of the easiest points of attack I might look to, that client's attorney, that's very accessible information, right? And so once I've identified who that attorney is, that point of attack is one that I know will, at the very least, it'll probably likely get me personally identifiable information that I can locate that potential target, right? Or reveal information about that potential target. Obviously, depending on how malicious and how much information is being retained in an insecure way, the potentials of that attacker could be, it's hard to fathom how far they could potentially go. We know that in 2019, I believe it's a company called TrialWorks fell victim to a ransomware attack. It's unclear, and this was a company that 40,000 attorneys at 40,000 clients are individuals at 2,500 firms were using and storing information, and that information was, once it fell victim to that ransomware attack, we know that there were cases where filing dates were missed. It's not clear whether or not that information whether the actual files themselves were accessed and what outcome could have happened from the attackers accessing those, which leads the question to which leads to the assumption that information was being stored in the cloud unencrypted, because had it been encrypted in a secure way, then there would not be the concern that the individual files may have been accessed. So really thinking about the fact that, as Matt really stated really importantly, and I think Peter brought up as well, the legal protections, that is great as far as the ability to argue that information that is accessed cannot be used against your client, but the threat to their personal safety and the personal safety of their families and other people in their communities and how that might be used in other ways outside of the legal system is still quite concerning.
And I think that it's really important for us to remember the duty of confidentiality as attorneys in every jurisdiction I'm aware of is far broader than the scope of what is privileged. It is far broader than simply having those disclaimers. It is part of our requirements as officers of the court and as people, and it's something that really we do not pay enough attention to. And I think it will be interesting to see if we get to a point where lawyers spend as much time focused on the ethics rules around client data as we do around the rules around client funds, which I feel like tends to be 90% of most ethics tests. But I want to go to something we promised in the title, which is the practical solutions, because I think that's the most relevant thing for most people. And I think Nash started to touch on one of the most vital parts of this, which is threat modeling, because one size fits none when it comes to privacy. And so I was hoping that we could go through some more of the high-level factors that go into creating an effective threat model for your organization, and what are the resources you like to direct people to for more follow-up information on that topic. And whoever wants to kick it off first.
Nash, I saw you unmute. So I muted. I was like, oh,
yeah, I think of that for this.
Oh, go ahead, Peter.
No, I think of EFF for threat modeling, please.
Well, I will also say that I learned threat modeling from Matt. So, but I'll kick it off though, which is, we start off, really asking, like, as I mentioned earlier, like, what are the assets that you actually want to protect? So we're talking about your contact list, the personal information of both of your clients as well as the people that work in your firm, right? Or that you associate with. And then, then who are you going to protect it from? And so, as I think we've mentioned here, it's not, just the potential of access from different, actors who may be impacted by legal protections around privilege. And often, I think something to note is that I think there's often an overestimation of what is actually protected by privilege. And so really adding that as well. But also, malicious actors that are not impacted by that. So folks who might access that information, either for political means or simply for the means of gaining, information that they can run, either identity fraud or other types of attacks that you or your clients might fall susceptible to. So really think about the wealth of, and I think each of you are way more you are the experts on what are the potential adversaries that your particular situation and the folks that you work with will experience. So really, working through that and how it pertains to your unique individual organization, right? And then like I said, there's always going to be that balance between, what is your appetite for risk? So what's going to be the worst thing that's going to happen if that information is accessed, and what are you actually not only willing to do, but capable of doing sustainably, right? There might be things that you're willing and able to do and can afford to do for a short period of time, but if they are so cumbersome or so difficult or so expensive or otherwise are otherwise prohibited, or there are other factors that prohibit you from being able to do them sustainably, then that's not the right answer, right? You need to figure out, really working out a chart, of what is the worst outcome, but also how likely is that outcome? Because if the outcome is very difficult, is very harmful, but the likelihood of it happening is very low, you're going to put a different amount of attention to it than something that is both likely and harmful. And similarly, for something that is likely to quite possibly could happen, but would have a very small impact, right? So you need to working on that calculation and what are you willing to do to protect the people that you're responsible for from falling victim to that. And then finally, we'll open up the floor for some more ideas on what are the appropriate ways to do that. The first thing that I'll open up the conversation with is really making sure that you are using end-to-end encrypted storage, right? So which means that even, if you decide to use cloud storage rather than hosting it yourself, that's an understandable solution based off of your unique calculation. But realizing that even if you're, it doesn't have to be like, oh, we don't trust Google. Even if the provider that you're using is, has the best interest, the best interest and best means to and best intentions to protect your information, if they are subject to, for instance, we'll use the example of RiseUp. A couple of years ago, RiseUp was forced to comply with giving information around folks that were using their service, and they also and then they were also issued a gag order, so they weren't able to disclose that they had to give that information. Subsequently to having to comply with that, they started then encrypting all of their email and using end-to-end encrypted emails so that they could not be forced to give that information because they no longer had access to that information. So that is one way. So really thinking about, like, what are the places in which end-to-end encryption is the right way, or what are the circumstances where really storing it locally within areas that you can control, so that any potential attacks would have to, or any potential attempts to access that information you would have to be notified. You would have to be made aware of them, or you would be the one who they would have to, whose systems they would have to breach in some way in order to access that information, so that you're more likely to be aware. Is one calculation that I would recommend folks think through.
Wonderful. And maybe Matt, if we can go to you next, because I know we did a whole talk together on this topic. I know you've done a lot of work here, so would love to know what other steps you think are important.
Well, you're two things. Like you're a lawyer for an organization, a nonprofit. They have an IT person who I don't want to get into a fight with. They're all after me. So, you have to do what they tell you to do. You have to use the software they tell you to use. You might not even have the ability to install stuff on your computer. Who knows? Like there's all these different IT rules. So speak to your IT team or professional or whoever makes the rules on that kind of stuff about, hey, are we using the best way to communicate this? Would you, if your life depended on it, here's this legal brief or here's this client deposition or something, like, would you send this through our email system? And if they're like, well, if my freedom depended on it, no, right? Then you probably shouldn't, and you could work something out together. But you're also a human being as a regular person, and a lot of the work you do, especially in this space, it kind of leans towards that. And there you could install and use whatever you want. So again, if you're going to use an email service, Gmail has great encryption and it works really well. And it's actually all locked down, but you're sharing a copy of the keys with Google. And to Nash's point, like if Google gets legally compelled to share that email, well, they'll push back a little bit, but they have to, right? So it might make sense to use email services outside the United States that also has encryption where only you have the key. Protonmail.com is very popular. Tutanota.com is another one that's based in Germany. And either of these work well, but they only work great when the other person also uses it. And that's not likely, right? So you have to convince this other person to use that email service. Now, if they're your client, that makes sense. But if they're some outside email, well, yeah, you can't convince the world to move. So you just got to deal with the realities. Again, like sustainability and common sense will get you far. And there's so much on threat modeling. And, I might have taught you, Nash, but then now you're at EFF, so you're writing it. So, and thank you for all the work you do.
Amazing. And I think, Matt, you were touching on a lot of great points that I was hoping, Peter, you could follow up on in the sort of this next question of, we talk a lot about encryption, and we've started to talk about some of the differences in the types of encryption that are available in different platforms. Could you go into a bit more detail about why not all encryption is equivalent, and what are some of the factors that people should be looking at when they're thinking about encryption, not just for email, but for all of the different ways that we need to encrypt our data?
Sure, yeah. So encryption, you can think of it as different types of cars. You can have, heavier encryption. Car might be slower, like a big Mack truck or a Brinks unit that's, transporting valuables. It's going to be slow and cumbersome, but pretty strong. There's lighter weight encryption that'll get your messages flowing a bit faster, and it's not all built for the same purpose, right? And so that's where it does come back to threat modeling. One example, a lot of people are switching off of WhatsApp, going to Signal as a messaging app. This guy Moxie, who runs Signal, did develop this super cool encryption protocol for Signal, and he licensed it. He sold it to use by WhatsApp, and Snap evidently is saying they're using a similar form. But those companies are implementing it differently than Signal does. And we think in ways that expose a bit more of maybe the metadata, the data about who you're talking to when, even if not that, actual content of the communication. So there are different implementations, even of the same, protocols. There's a lot we just don't know as well about how these private sector firms are, protecting our data or not. And so that's why we do, point people towards open source tools as much as possible. Things where you can, lift up the hood, to get back to the car analogy, and experts on your side can take a look and see what's actually going on. At our firm, we used to force everyone to get a PGP key. This is an overlay on regular encryption that encrypts the content of the emails. An overlay on email services. It's pretty cumbersome. It's a huge headache. PGP stands for pretty good privacy, and it's basically that. It's pretty good. But there's a lot of people moving to mobile, and there's better ways, I think, now. But it kind of depends on what's really going to work for you, as people have said.
Great. We have a bunch of other topics that we had talked about going over, but I want to start getting to some of the great questions that have been in the chat. The first one that came in is talking about a bit about the role of insurance policies in mitigating the risk here. I'll confess this is not something where I have a much experience. The thought of insurance just terrifies me, and navigating all of that. Have either of you, have any of you looked at those different options?
I've looked into it. Cybersecurity insurance is a thing, and it's something that's worth looking into. Just do your due diligence. There's a lot of people out there that offer it. Some of them are like well-known insurance providers, like Chubb, and things like that. The thing about cybersecurity insurance is you want to make sure that it'll cover you from things that are likely to happen. Kind of going back to what Nash says, which is, you have a third-party provider and they get hacked, whether it's TrialWorks or SolarWind or whatever. Blackbaud got hacked, and a lot of people are using that for cloud service. So you want to make sure that your third-party cloud service gets hacked. What do we get? Like, does it cover cybersecurity pros, which are quite expensive? That's why we get the nice backgrounds. We can afford that to come in and like help you resolve the issue. Will it help you figure out how to prevent this from happening? Right? Like, is it training is covered in there, or recovery of your data is covered in there? So I think if there's like some legal things involved, like will it cover a case that you can make against this provider if they were found like it was their negligence and things like that? So you want to look into that. I don't want to get into like turns into cybersecurity insurance thing, but it is something that exists, and it's something that nonprofits should look at, because it is really expensive when you try to get the pros to resolve an issue, not like your regular digital security person who but to have like the pros come in and resolve an issue. Ransomware is also something you want to make sure it's covered, because it's quite rampant. And email leaks, you want to make sure reputational damage can somehow be covered. Ransomware is when everything in all the computers all of a sudden start getting encrypted, and you have to pay a certain amount of Bitcoin or money to get them decrypted, and you're basically held hostage. So it's like, look, like, will you cover us paying this to get our data? What else are there options here? So things like that you want to look into.
Yeah, just jump in. I've been to some of those presentations where they're trying to sell you the the cybersecurity policy add-on, and they point to ransomware, and for that, it's just another reason to try to minimize that data that you're holding, try to delete data that's old, and get some retention policies. So there's just not that much sitting around in the clear for hackers to get at. And then it's also on funders, right? Foundations should start to provide for us to be able to afford some of these add-ons and all of the the audits and the protocols and policy changes that go with them. So I would put this back to the foundations to support us to move that direction.
And what do you think is the role of backups and having just redundancy as part of that ransomware strategy versus having the risk mitigation on what can be captured, just the ability to restore that data when you're locked out?
Well, if you make a backup, it's great, because that's the thing. Your computer has been fully encrypted and you can't get in, but then you're like, oh, I'll just blow this away and use the backup I made yesterday. And if all these hospitals and institutions and governments that got ransomware attacked had just yesterday's backup, they would restore from there. And it's like a really cheap way to just get around the problem. Even if that's infected and the bomb is going to go off again and encrypt the machine, you could buy yourself quite a window of time. And oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes you have a nice clean backup eventually. It's about having a library of backups to go to. So great point, Albert.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that is when Matt made me think of when he mentioned the hospital ransomware, ransomware attacks on hospitals, is one of the best things you can do, and you can do it today, is make sure your operating systems are up to date. Make sure the software that you're using, any patches or upgrades have been done, because often the exploits that are taken advantage of in order to deploy ransomware attacks are things that are well known and have been patched. And in a lot of cases, those are the hospitals and other institutions that have fell victim to it it's because their systems have been outdated or are not well maintained. And so just making sure that your systems are up to date. Actually, this week there was an update. If you're an iOS user, iPhones, iPads, an important upgrade came out, I believe, yesterday. So update your phones today. All that information is sensitive. So yeah, just making sure that the backups is a great way to protect, because the ransomware attacks, for folks that are not aware, often what ransomware attacks will do, and the reason that, even if your data is encrypted, you could still be susceptible to it, is because what they'll do is throw another layer of encryption on top of your information that you don't have the key to unlock, and they will hold your access to that information until you comply, until you give them the money that they're asking for, or whatever other thing that they're holding your data victim to, right? And so that's why when I mentioned the TrialWorks attack, we know that folks missed filing deadlines, because that's what we know for sure happened. Whether or not the information itself was accessed, we know that they didn't have access to that information to be able to serve their clients. So by having the backups, you are able to say, we're not going to comply. We're not going to encourage that behavior. We're not going to encourage those activities by paying. We're simply going to say, what, that system is no longer accessible to us, but we still have access to all the information. Maybe, depending on how frequently you're running your backup, maybe it's 6 hours old. So maybe you've lost the things that happened in the last 6 hours, but you know that you've got all the access for the information that you needed since the last time that you ran that update or ran that backup. So backups are a great way to protect yourself from that situation.
Can I follow up on that though? There has been like an increase of like hostageware, where their ransomware attackers don't just take and encrypt your data with an encryption key, right? But they actually also say, but also we got a nice copy of your data, and that's what happened to Blackbot, right?
Yeah.
So can we talk about that? Because that's even messier.
Well, what they know is that people don't always pay, or they just recover. So great point, right? And so what they do is they say, we have a copy, and to prove it, here's a little piece, and we're going to start releasing it in the public, on a dark website, or just on some, like on Twitter or something, paragraph by paragraph, page by page, until you pay. So even if you're fine and back and running, you're like, well, we don't want that to happen. We've been held hostage, to your point, and now we'll pay anyway. So yeah, people have gotten smarter about this, and that's even worse. And there's no evidence or proof that when you pay, they won't just do this anyway. But if they're a professional outfit, they realize that it hurts business if you lie.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic, and I think, back to your point of encryption, right? Like a lot of those attacks actually happen through spear phishing attacks. So could you all maybe talk about that? I feel like that's a really practical piece of knowledge. Like, what are those? How do they work? Why do they work? How does escalating privilege work? Like, can you give us like a hacker 101? Like, how does this happen and how can we avoid it? Like, as a real organization that uses email and opens files.
Cool. I'd like to take this one, even though, I work at one of those foundations that Peter's talking about. So listen, yeah, like at the end of the day, you'll be targeted. Like, for example, I was talking to one of our grantees was targeted, and you'll get an email that looks really legit, like exactly how a normal email should, because this might be someone who's compromised your email system or the email system of someone you talk to all the time, a partner or someone else in the space. So they already know how you talk. They already know what the process is because they saw it. And then they'll just kind of show up in the middle of the email from an email account that is just slightly off. Maybe it's a typo, but more often it's something like a character from another language. So like a umlaut is on the character, but it looks like a normal spelling. So you're not going to detect this, and it looks totally legit. And they'll say, hey, follow this link. And it's either going to lead to them trying to get you to send the money or wire the money, or it's for you to have a payload, a nice little gift of malware that will take over and compromise your machine. You might not even be the last target. You might be just like leapfrogging their way to the actual target. It's unrealistic to imagine that you're gonna notice this email. If someone knows how to do this, like they're a professional hacker, like people have gotten really good at this, and they can make 10 years of salary in one good exploit. So you should invest in cybersecurity awareness building and having people detect obvious mistakes by people who are new to this. But you also need to have some protections for what happens after you click, what happens after you open an attachment. I mean, lawyers are all about email. It's like you spend most of your time in PDFs, documents, and emailing. That was nothing new there, especially now because of COVID. So you're going to be like on your, whatever, 13th hour, middle of your workday or whatever, you all pull crazy hours, and you're highly susceptible to clicking on a link. And you need to have some protections on each endpoint or each device, like your phone or your computer, but also on the network itself to prevent what will happen next once the mistake is made. But to build awareness, I recommend different companies have different things. I don't want to none of them are sponsoring this, my tea mug, but Know Before, it's pretty affordable, and they have a pretty good anti-phishing education, but so do 20 other companies that are just the same.
And do you know if any of those firms offer free or discounted trainings and just efforts to try to test people's awareness of spear phishing for nonprofits?
Well, if you have an IT team that is actually pretty, like, we can write programs, and maybe you're a web developer, there's a program called Go Fish that's free, and you need to spend time investing in like setting it up, but it's really great. And you can make your own phishing fake emails that go out to everyone, and it tells you who made a mistake and clicked on it, and you could say, hey, it's okay, let's help you, that was a fake one, but it could be real, and explain it. But if you don't have that capacity, Know Before is an example of someone who has like some service level pricing. You want to look for the corporate social responsibility department, or something in marketing. They'll offer scholarships, and I know that they're example of one that has some different pricing for nonprofits, but don't quote me on that, because sales are sales.
All right, so I see there's another question about how would you feel about amending the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act to have better security research? And I'm not sure if there is a specific type of research that you were imagining, Amelie, that would come in through the sorts of amendments. Maybe a bit more background would help.
Yeah, just I'm just talking about like allowing for good faith like security researchers. I feel like there really isn't much space for that right now. I think usually you get an email that's already like, hey, like I found a bug. But like usually when you get that email, there's already some sort of like extortion happening. So I'm just wondering if you all have any opinion. I saw Matt and Nash nodding, but I'm just curious. Like the CFAA really hasn't been designed to allow for extensive like research, or for people to do research, especially on public infrastructure, right? Like there's a bunch of cases where like good faith like white hat researchers got into a lot of trouble for finding bugs in like transportation systems, or like other sort of digital infrastructure. And I'm really curious what your thoughts are, especially looking at sort of public like digital infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like people like myself, like, I work for, Ford Foundation at my day job, and I'm a computer hacker, and I'm always hacking, like, your clients and organizations you come from, to try to find problems, to just raise them to people. But technically, like, you're breaking the law to do that, to open up something that you bought from the store, like a camera or a phone. You might be breaking the law if you want to make changes or analyze what's going on in there. And that's how this, CFAA law is written. So it doesn't really lend itself to supporting nonprofits and people who can't afford very expensive teams to come in and sign things and et cetera. These researchers, Google's Project Zero Bugs team and things like that, they want to help you, but the law doesn't really allow that. So you would have to say, we have a bug bounty program. For example, at Ford Foundation, I think we have a bug bounty program. And you can do that with a group like HackerOne or BugCrowd or whatever. Again, they don't sponsor me, so they're all the same. And they will say, look, if you're a researcher, you're a hacker, and you find a bug at this nonprofit, this is how you can report it. Because sometimes it's hard to get that done. You're just writing random emails you found, right? It also says, here's what they'll give you: a gift card, or kudos, or a thank you note. People do it for the love, and also sometimes financial rewards. Nash, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree in that the CFAA does definitely chill the ability for ethical hackers to report vulnerabilities that they're aware of. And so if we don't know that it's broken, it's really difficult to fix it. And so we need to be encouraging more opportunities for there to be ethical ways for folks to make the manufacturers or whoever's responsible for securing the system aware that there are vulnerabilities. A few years ago, the state of Georgia, just as an interesting anecdote, there was someone doing research realized that there was a backdoor into a university that was holding lots of voter data for the state of Georgia, and they ethically reported that there was this vulnerability, and they were reported to the FBI, who then did an investigation, said this person didn't do anything wrong. And what the state of Georgia then decided to do, what lawmakers in the state of Georgia said, well, whether we should make a law to make what he did illegal then. And so luckily us, our Electronic Frontier Alliance partners, EF Georgia, who's based in Atlanta, really fought hard for that legislation, and we're able to organize a number of computer science professionals in the state of Georgia and nationally to write in support of making sure that the protections remained to that type of ethical reporting could continue to happen. And ultimately, the governor vetoed the law. It did pass through both states of the Georgia legislature and was ultimately vetoed by the governor, thankfully. But yeah, we need to really, I think, educate lawmakers and others on why it is so important that there be opportunities for folks to report these vulnerabilities so that we can protect folks from the potential outcomes of the exploitation of those vulnerabilities.
So Peter, I was hoping you could expand a bit on what you put in the chat about Aaron's Law, and just in a minute or two, also give us a bit of background on Aaron Swartz's case and just the tragedy that unfolded when MIT targeted him.
Sure, yeah, and I may not be the top expert, but yeah, really respect Aaron Swartz's work in his relatively short life. He was just a brilliant inventor, contributed to the creation of RSS readers, and co-founded Reddit, and was working on projects to really radically increase access to knowledge and access to information. I guess it was 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah, about 10 years ago now. He died while he was being prosecuted for using some know-how and some computers to tap into the the Pacer system, or yeah, it was Pacer and JSTOR, and these sort of like privatized freemium or premium stores of knowledge. Pacer being the court filings in the U.S. JSTOR being academic journal articles. These were his target to really radically increase access to information, and so he was essentially hacking into those and was being really harshly prosecuted for that. This really kind of diabolical investigation that found this manifesto that he had put out with spouting this philosophy, and used that to show some sort of mens rea for. So Aaron's Law has been pushed for years now in Congress to amend the CFAA. It makes pretty reasonable amendments. I think the two that EFF highlights are reducing prosecutorial discretion in charging. So putting some reasonable bounds to the sentencing for someone who's breaking into an authorized area, but it's a victimless crime, and it's et cetera. And it's also substantively trying to eliminate the use of criminal charges for what are purely contractual disputes, right? So if you sign a click wrap contract or something, you're agreeing to use a service or a product in an authorized way, and that shouldn't lead to prison time if you're smart enough to find better uses for it. That's a quick run through.
One thing I wanted to add, an area where we see a real tension when it comes to amending the CFAA and some of the other outlaws in this area is that at the same time, that we're pulling back the criminalization of a lot of this activity, we're also reducing the number of civil legal protections against, biometric surveillance firms and other firms that are trying to, scrape our data from the web in order to build ever more invasive surveillance tools. So at least coming from the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project's perspective, this all gets really complicated because we want to make sure that people like Aaron are not getting prosecuted, but we also want to make sure that folks like Clearview AI are not getting a green light to take all of our Facebook images. So I know we have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to re-invite everyone to ask any other questions they have, but I know that especially for people who are not full-time, in this space, it can all feel overwhelming and it can all feel like a lot. And I really just wanted to make sure that each of you had time to focus on, what's something coming away from this event, people can feel more in control of this whole process, and then like something that will help put them on the track to bit by bit to get to a more secured place with all of their data. And why don't we reverse the starting order? Start with Nash, then Peter, then Matt.
Oh no, you picked me first. I was just going to try and find a link for it, and while Matt and Peter are speaking, I will add a link to the chat to a sheet that we've created at EFF to help folks go through a threat modeling process, right? To ask yourself the important questions for your organization and to map out the different threats that your organization faces and how much energy it would make sense to put into solving for each of those. And just to kind of reiterate some of the other points that we've kind of spoken about, make sure your systems are up to date. That's one of the first things I would recommend doing today. And as you know, as Matt mentioned earlier, checking in with the folks who are responsible for the IT in your organization and making sure that the asking the appropriate questions that we've brought here, and I'm sure that Matt and Peter will expound on, to make sure that the information is being protected and secured in the ways that are most responsible for the scenario that your situation fits. And then again, asking yourself the really key questions of what are the things that I'm trying to protect? Who am I likely to who is likely to try to access them? Who are my potential adversaries? What is the worst thing that would happen if that information is accessed? And how much and what am I really willing to do sustainably to protect that information and really balancing out the labor of doing that with the cost of doing that with the outcomes of not being able to do that. And so really just doing those things really intentionally. And like I said, I'll add that link as Matt and Peter expound on whatever.
Great, thank you for that. And Peter, if you could, or actually Matt, I see you're unmuted.
I forgot the reverse order. I like how you threw us off, Albert. You got me.
It's like keep you on your toes, you know?
Yeah. Thanks, friend. Thank you. I worked on this tool. I spent like 10 months building this tool with a couple of my hacker friends for my day job, and it's like freely available for anyone. And it's a little survey you take, and it just tells you like, well, we think that you're weak in this area. We think you're strong in this area. Kind of like if you remember like a Cosmo quiz or Vogue quiz, or like a Facebook, like which Jones brother are you type of thing. So I put that in the chat, and it's designed for not just the legal person to go through, but you could just go through it and just guess through your answers. We don't get any of that data. It's just local to what your browser is. But if you actually can get a couple of people who can make decisions in a room together, it's a nice little tool to just kind of figure out where you're at and give you one little actionable step above you to level up, whether you're below the bar or like think you're all perfect.
I really think that's such an important message to take away from this. Like, no matter where we are in our cybersecurity practices, there's always more that we can be doing, and there's always way more than we can do at once. And so it really is that incremental process of building day by day. And Peter, let's go to you.
Sure. Again, so the question is an actionable step or a tip. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think people should focus on just so they have that one thing at the at their fingertips that they can look at to think, okay, I can do this. At least I can do this. I may not be able to get my entire ransomware insurance policy set up, but I can at least do this much.
Yeah, thanks. Cool. So yesterday was Data Protection Day. So happy International Data Protection Day. I think we can still say. Access Now, we published this little poll about your practices. So that comes down to some of the basics that we promote for everyone. I think, yeah, to take it back to kind of the legal world, I would say having this conversation with your clients and with your witnesses and those probably more vulnerable folks around you. I think what I would suggest is to just at the start of the relationship or near it, have this little talk about what are the parameters of privacy, what do we really value, who might be the threat, what's the threat model, who are the adversaries, and then what's going to work for our relationship and the way that we communicate and share information and data. And I think you'll be able to find some basic steps. So maybe it's a new app, maybe it's both taking one of these quizzes. So yeah, I think that personal relationship piece I would put up.
And my hope, just selfishly as a lawyer in the NGO space, is that the more we are all having conversations like this, the more that we're making this part of the standard approach to doing our job and protecting our clients, the more this is going to become just the default of our practice. And suddenly, over time, it won't be that IT is fighting us over, for being the ones who want to have more security and more encryption. They're the ones who are going to be suggesting that from the start. And so I really think that, by doing this, we can protect our organizations, we can protect our clients, but we can also improve this profession to make sure that we're doing a better job as lawyers overall. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Really such a pleasure. And I know many of us have already added our contact links and resources to the chat, but we would love to stay in touch. And I'm sure everyone here is always eager to help NGOs, figure out what they can do to protect themselves.